Today, we're diving into one of the most disturbing and frankly complicated criminal partnerships in American history, Alvin and Judith Neelley. This story isn't just about a horrific crime, it's about how the line between victim and perpetrator can get so blurry it almost disappears. So right off the bat, here's the central puzzle of the whole case. You have two people, a husband and wife, who commit the same unspeakable crime. But look at their fates, completely different. He's executed. Her death sentence gets thrown out. So what happened? We're going to unpack the story behind that incredible outcome. All right, to even begin to understand the legal storm that followed, you first have to face the crime that put the Neelleys on the map, the absolutely brutal murder of a 13-year-old girl named Lisa Ann Millican. The facts here are just stark and chilling. Lisa Ann Millican, just a kid, was snatched by the Neelleys. And what happened next wasn't some quick, impulsive act of violence. No, this was days of calculated, sadistic cruelty. The sheer brutality of this crime sent shockwaves across the country and set the stage for one of the most complex legal battles you can imagine. And this right here, this is the question that hangs over everything. To understand Judith Neelley's part in this murder, you have to go back and understand her own story. You have to ask how someone who was a victim could possibly become a killer. So who were these two people, really? I mean, on paper, they're a husband and wife. But when you peel back even one layer, the dynamic was anything but equal. What you really had was a predator and, for all intents and purposes, a child. The contrast between them is just wow. On one side, you've got Alvin, a career criminal, violent, sadistic, and intensely possessive. And on the other side, Judith, a young girl from a rough background who was groomed by this man from the time she was 10 years old and married him when she was just 14. This power imbalance wasn't just part of their relationship, it was the entire foundation of it. So that dynamic festered into this unbelievably toxic, lethal partnership. And the psychology of their bond is absolutely key to understanding how they could commit such horrific crimes. This is not a simple story of two evil people deciding to do evil things. It's way more complex and, frankly, way more disturbing than that. There's a term that describes what was going on here perfectly: coercive control. And you've got to understand this isn't just about arguments or even just getting physical. No, this is a systematic process of just dismantling a person's entire identity, their independence, until the abuser has almost total power over their life. This was Alvin's weapon of choice. You can almost see Alvin's method like a horrifying checklist. First, he cut Judith off from her family, her only support system. Then came the nonstop psychological and physical abuse. He'd even use these warped ideologies to justify his absolute power over her. And the end result? Total control. Judith's entire reality was shaped and dictated by him. This is what experts call trauma bonding, and it's a truly twisted psychological phenomenon. The abuser, the person causing all the pain and chaos, also becomes the only source of comfort, the only stable thing in the victim's world. So Judith came to see Alvin not just as her tormentor, but terrifyingly as her protector too. Okay, so with that psychological backdrop, let's get back to the crime itself and what happened in court. Because this is where the story takes another sharp, unexpected turn and leads to a verdict that people still argue about to this day. I mean, just look at this timeline. It really shows the prolonged nature of Lisa Ann Millican's suffering. This was not a crime of passion. It was days of being held captive, of being tortured, before she was finally murdered. And it's that calculated cruelty that made the legal arguments that came next so incredibly intense. So at trial, you get two completely different stories. The prosecution argued that, yeah, her backstory is tragic, but Judith was an active, willing participant in these crimes. They had evidence of her direct involvement. But her defense team? They painted a picture of a classic coerced victim, someone who was acting under extreme duress because she was completely psychologically dominated by her husband and feared for her own life. So what happened? Initially, both of them were sentenced to death, but while Alvin was eventually executed, Judith's sentence was commuted to life in prison. The judge basically said that her young age and the incredible abuse she suffered made her different, in a way, siding with the defense's argument that she was a victim too. As you can probably guess, this decision was not popular. The public outrage was so massive that the state Alabama did something you almost never see. They passed a law specifically targeting Judith Neelley.
just to make absolutely sure she could never, ever be eligible for parole. That alone shows you how deeply this case split public opinion. So, decades later, why are we still talking about this? Well, it's because this case leaves us with these huge, uncomfortable questions about justice, responsibility, and what people are capable of. Experts still study this case through a few key psychological lenses. We've talked about coercive control and trauma bonding. They also look at things like learned helplessness, which is when a victim starts to believe they're completely powerless to change their situation. All these concepts are ways we try to make sense of something that feels, well, senseless. And that brings us to the really tough questions this case forces us to ask. For starters, how much responsibility does a victim of abuse have when they themselves go on to commit violent acts against someone else? There's just no easy answer to that. And that leads to an even harder question, right? Is there a line? Can being psychologically dominated, can fearing for your life ever completely excuse participating in the torture and murder of an innocent child? And really, it all boils down to this fundamental challenge for our entire legal system. How do you balance empathy for a defendant's own trauma with the absolute need for accountability for their actions? It's a tightrope walk with the highest stakes imaginable. As for Judith Neelley, she is still in prison in Alabama today. Her life was spared, but her freedom was not. She will die behind bars. We'll end on this thought right here. The story of Alvin and Judith Neelley is just this grim, dark exploration of how cruelty can be taught, how a person can be completely warped by abuse into something monstrous. It's a chilling reminder that the origins of evil are often a lot more complicated than we want to believe.